When we're dividing by two decimals, there's just a few rules we have to keep in mind. The first rule basically says that we have to make sure that we're actually not dividing by a decimal, but dividing by a whole number, and we can do this by moving some decimal places around. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If you have, like 5.782 divided by 4.1, see, you can keep the ratio the same as long as you multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number. So for instance, if you multiplied by 10 over 10, then in effect what would happen is these decimals would move to the right. And so this ratio here would be equivalent to 57.81 divided by 41. So whatever this ratio is, this ratio would be the same thing. So you can move these decimal places in unison to the left or to the right to make sure that you have a whole number as the divisor. So that's the first thing we're going to do. And then second of all, after we do that, when you do long division and you get your final answer, you're going to move the decimal and the quotient to the same place as the modified dividend, as the modified numerator here. Now, if these don't make perfectly good sense, that's totally okay. Wait till we do an example and we'll see if we can clarify a couple of these things. Let's try a few examples. All right, here's our first example. 20.696 divided by 5.2. Okay, so we're going to start by writing this using long division, and some of this I've pre-written just to speed things along. So I've got 5.2 as the divisor, and I've got 20.696 as the dividend. I really would like the divisor to be a whole number, not a decimal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this decimal place, the 5.2, and I'm going to move it to the right 1 unit, in other words, multiply by 10 to make it 52. And I also have to move the decimal place for the dividend as well to keep that in line. So we'll have 206.96. So let me rewrite those real quick. Okay, so here's where we're actually going to do the long division. So let's go for it. All right, let's see. 52 doesn't go into 2, doesn't go into 20. It does go into 206. It goes a total of 3 times. We'll multiply 3 times 52 and get 156. We'll subtract and we'll get, let's see, a total of 50. And then we'll bring down the next number, bring down the 9, we'll get a 9. Then we'll ask, okay, how many times does 52 go into 509? I think it goes a total of 9 times. 9 times 2 is 18, carry the 1. We get 45 plus the extra 1 makes 46. We'll subtract these and we'll get basically, what would that be? 41. 41. And then we'll bring down the 6. And then we'll ask ourselves, how many times does 52 go into 416? And I think that would be a total of 8 times. So we'll have 8 times 2 is 16, carry the 1, and 8 times 5 is 40, and 1 makes 41, and we get to a point where we have no remainder. So now we moved decimals around. We had decimals in one place and then we moved them, but so where's the decimal place in our answer? We have a 3, a 9, and an 8. What is it, 398? Is it 39.8 or 3.98? We're not really sure. Well, here's where the last rule comes in. Let me go back to our notes here. The decimal and the quotient is in the same place as the modified dividend. So that dividend where we move the decimal place around, in other words, right here, we're just going to keep that same decimal place for our quotient. So our final answer would be 3.98. Now, one last note I'll make about this example before we go to our next example. Here we wound up somewhat fortunate that when we did our last digit here, we wound up with a remainder of 0. If you did not get a remainder of 0, then you can keep going. What you would have to do, though, is when you have 0.96, you would just have to include a 0 and possibly another 0 and maybe another 0 and continually bring these down if you continue to get no remainder, and you would keep going until you don't get a remainder anymore. So just keep that in mind, but in this case, we wound up pretty fortunate and everything turned out pretty good. All right, our last example, we have 25.071 divided by 4.11. So I'll set this up just like before. We have our divisor, we have our dividend, and I notice we've got a decimal here for our divisor. So the first thing we'll do is we'll move this decimal place 2 units to the right so that the divisor is a whole number, and we'll move the dividend 2 places to the right just to keep the ratio intact. So we'll get 411 divided by 2,507.1. This is the same ratio here. So we'll actually do our division here. Let's see, 411 does not go into 2, doesn't go into 225 or 250. It will go into 2,507 a total of 6 times. So we'll get 6 times 1 is 6, 6 times 1 is 6, 6 times 4 is 24. We'll subtract, and we will get a total of 41. We'll bring down the 1, and then we'll say how many times does 411 go into 411? It goes 1 time, and we get 411 and 11, subtract with a remainder of 0. We'll find out where the decimal was in the modified dividend, and we'll just carry this on up to the top, and it'll be 6.1 for our quotient. So this quotient here will be a total of 6.1. Again, we got a little fortunate, and I designed these examples so that we could finish them somewhat quickly, but just be aware if you did have a remainder, you would need to continue to bring down zeros, and this decimal may get longer and longer and longer, but that doesn't change where you would put the decimal. You just take this decimal and move it on up vertically into the quotient. So anyways, hopefully that helps you better understand how to divide decimals.